This episode of Onward to Victory is proudly presented by WCScreens.com. For wholesale pricing and nationwide shipping, don't forget our pals at WCScreens.com, the gold standard of the screen printing and embroidery industry. You know the name. And on with the show. Today on Onward to Victory, join me for a conversation with internationally acclaimed artist and Notre Dame alumna, Kathleen Keifer. There are very few artists out there who capture the essence and the spirit of Notre Dame and her football team, quite like Kathleen. And as I was talking to the Notre Dame enthusiast Kathleen, I soon found out that her connection with the university and the football team somehow ran even deeper than I ever thought possible. Buckle up those chin straps, Irish fans. This is Onward to Victory. Hello, Irish fans, and welcome to Onward to Victory, a Notre Dame football podcast. My name is Alex Painter, and thank you for joining me here today. I'm not going to take long here in this show lead. We have important work to do. I had the distinct privilege and pleasure to speak with Notre Dame artist Kathleen Keifer. It was a lovely conversation. I think you're really going to enjoy it. But before we jump into the feature of this 69th episode in show history, please make sure you have indeed subscribed to the show. That way you can be alerted to all the new episodes as they are released. So if you're holding an iPhone in your hand, please visit that purple podcast icon and rate the show and leave a review if you're feeling kind of nice. But of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, please bookmark onwardtovictory.blog. We are kicking up activity on the show's website, so please make sure that you visit onwardtovictory.blog. And again, just give it a quick bookmark. And that whole initiative, the website that is sponsored by our friends at WCScreens.com. And speaking of sponsors, let me throw out some quick thank yous to the Consensus All-Americans. Those kindly folks who have donated to keep the show's train on the tracks, if you will, and they include Michael Finan of Rutherford, New Jersey, Brad Glazier of Williamsburg, Indiana, Will Fuller of Warren, Ohio, Dr. Jeremy Scarlett of Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, and Mr. Andy Nickel of South Bend, Indiana. Eternally grateful for every last one of you, and of course also to WCScreens.com, our banner sponsor. And just know that if you'd like to get your name called as a Consensus All-American yourself, please feel free to visit the virtual tip jars at paypal.me/onwardtovictory for a one-time donation, or even better, patreon.com/onwardtovictorypodcast for ongoing monthly support. And every bit of which is greatly appreciated. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation I was able to have with Kathleen Keifer. But if you're curious about her body of work, please follow her on Facebook at Kathleen Keifer Artist. Now, just so you know, it's Kathleen, and Keifer is Keifer. So if you're not of the Facebook persuasion, that's okay. Visit KathleenKeifer.com, and you'll get a good sense of her style, and you'll get a really good glimpse of just a small portion even, of some of the work she does with Notre Dame football and a variety of other subjects as well. And as you'll find out during our conversation, I tried to touch on as many of them as possible. But of course, we always ended up circling back to Notre Dame because we are just a couple of Notre Dame diehards talking on a Notre Dame football podcast today. But be sure to check out her work, even if it's while you're listening here to this episode. I personally have a deep admiration for her work, and it was just really awesome to have the opportunity to not only meet her, but even make a friend out of this episode. So without further ado, let's jump right in. My conversation with Notre Dame artist Kathleen Keifer right after this. Welcome back to Onward to Victory, a Notre Dame football podcast. Irish fans, as always, this is Alex Painter, and I have with me here today an actual painter whose work I deeply admire. I am thrilled to welcome Kathleen Keifer to the show. Hi, Kathleen. How are you?
I'm fabulous tonight. I'm in South Bend. I'm right next to campus. I couldn't be happier.
I'm really, really appreciative that you're electing to spend a little bit of your time here this evening with me and then with us. And got a lot of really good questions for you, I think, and really, really excited for this conversation. But I wanted to give information about you just in case they're unaware. So Kathleen is currently based in Manhattan Beach, California, and is a native of Chicago, Illinois. She's been painting since she was very young. As I mentioned in the show lead, Kathleen received her Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Notre Dame, and she also studied at the Art Institute of Chicago. So she's been painting professionally since 1996, and her art hangs in galleries all over the world. Her work appears in many private collections from people or companies you may have heard of, including James Cameron, Jack Nicholson, Kelly Clarkson, Hilton Hotels, and Walt Disney Studios, just to name a few. So while her whole body of work is incredibly varied and diverse, Kathleen is absolutely prolific when it comes to capturing Notre Dame imagery through her colorist painting style. So very quickly here, Kathleen, as we share a mutual friend in Jim Augustine, better known to the masses as Augie of Augie's Locker Room, that's actually where I saw your work for the first time here. And I just thought it was so cool and so refreshing. And when I say cool, I don't mean like sunglasses and a leather jacket cool. I mean like kind of like cool, like taking a big drink of water on a very hot day, like just that kind of cool. But it was a couple of years ago that we actually very briefly crossed paths there at Augie's Locker Room. And I believe you were picking up some old pieces of Notre Dame stadium seating, which we will get to here in a bit. So you entered Notre Dame as a legacy student. So in other words, you had other members of your family attend Notre Dame before you. So to you, as someone who has been just very, very intimately connected with the university, what is the spirit of Notre Dame?
Great question. And you're right, it's such a big part of my DNA and the way I was raised that, okay, I'm going to give you a pop culture answer, I think. So the Ted Lasso TV show, there's this quote that says, it's the hope that kills you. And I believe that the Notre Dame spirit is more about, it's the lack of hope that kills you. It's apathy that will kill you. And that there is great faith in the Notre Dame community that we will win overall. We will prevail, whatever that means. And I have to tell you, in my life, I've lived all over the country. I've done so many things that big part of the Notre Dame family for me. And I certainly think about this. I'm mentoring art majors who graduated from Notre Dame, is that we are the golden family. We help each other. We are looking out for each other. And there's a value. For example, I have an art exhibition right now at the Hilton Hotel, the Embassy Suites on Angela Avenue. And I can keep it up for 3 months. No one is walking away with any of my art pieces. It's the golden family. I would not do that in LA. I would not do that in any other group, but I trust Notre Dame. It's the spirit of Notre Dame. We just behave in a different way. It makes us be better people, I believe.
No, that's fantastic. And thank you for sharing. And I mentioned legacy. Your grandfather, Frank O'Toole, was a freshman guard on the 1924 team. And just in case, if that team rings a bell for any of our listeners, that was, of course, the infamous team on the varsity level. They had the Four Horsemen, which are about as cemented in Notre Dame lore as it gets. They were powering the Coach Rockney offense all the way to the national championship. But could you please share maybe a little bit more about memories of your grandfather?
Well, so my grandfather was from San Diego, but he went to prep school at Santa Clara, which is northern, California. And it's now no longer a prep school. It's now, only a college. It's Santa Clara University.
Okay.
So he went from Santa Clara which had huge Notre Dame connections. And so he enters Notre Dame in 1924, a big year. I have his photo album. He took pictures of the Four Horsemen after practice outside the field house. He took pictures of Lions Hall being built. I mean, this guy
is so cool.
I mean, and 1924 is obviously our first national championship year. I mean, we should have had 13. We should have some other years before that. But
yes, agreed.
Boy, he was there with Newt Rockney and the Four Horsemen. And there's one note he wrote to my grandmother, who was at St. Mary's, and she's also class of 28. And he wrote on the back of it, and I'm paraphrasing, like, we scrimmaged against the national championships team today. So he's, so that's a lot of information. He wasn't a starter. They were using the Stanford offense, the Stanford shift, and they just about ruined us. And so my grandfather was part of that first train trip, 1926, to play USC. He was part of that that huge 1927 USC Notre Dame game in Soldier Field, where that thing, they're estimating now that the attendance was around 160,000, which
Just
is a
wild,
record.
yeah.
I mean, that was a record for probably 60 years.
Right.
Because why? Because Notre Dame Stadium was being built. There was no way that Notre Dame could accommodate those sorts of crowds.
Right.
I mean, Knute Rockne was a national celebrity, and I mean, marketing genius. I don't want to, we're not making a Knute Rockne podcast right now, but I mean, a total marketing genius. And my grandfather's very close to him. He asked my grandfather to write a poem in the 1926 Football Review.
Okay.
So in that review, Francis O'Toole's a poem. My grandfather also wrote a lot of poetry in the 1927 Dome yearbook. He has almost 20 pages of poetry in that yearbook.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, poetry had a different place in society then. I mean, you can't imagine, our coach now, Marcus Freeman, asking one of the players to write a poem about the season. I mean, it just, or to encapsulate, or to summarize the season.
Right.
Different time. This is, 1926 when he did that.
No, that's so interesting you mentioned that, because you're right. I kind of go through the archives a lot with the Scholastic and the school paper and the yearbooks, and yeah, they're absolutely rife with poetry, and it's quite beautiful. And there's a lot of football players who you didn't think would participate in such a thing, but they're widespread, and that's amazing. I actually had written down that I saw that your grandfather was the editor in chief of or was he an editor of your book?
Well, so that's a great little details. One of my collectors gave me a gift of the 1927 Dome, the yearbook, and it was in that dome, because I'm one of 8 kids. It's there's no way 5 of 8's going to end up with any of these artifacts.
Right.
But one of my collectors sent it to me, and I found out that he was literary editor of the Scholastic magazine, and I was the art editor when I was at Notre Dame, and I did not know that. So it's just cross time and space, kind of following in his footsteps.
What a cool connection with your grandfather. That's amazing. I was doing a little bit of digging in the archives myself, and I just happened to pick up on that. And it's like, I'm going to ask that. I assumed you were fully aware of that, and I'm glad you are. And I'm glad a relic was returned to you too, or given to you, I should say. That's really awesome.
And I subsequently giving domes as gifts, that's a big thing. And I really appreciate it. I've gotten a 1942 dome as a gift, which isn't, because, every undergraduate in that yearbook was in harm's way.
Right.
Every single one of those guys was in the war. I have a 28 yearbook. I mean, I've collected a bunch, but I'm just crazy about these domes. I can't get enough of them.
Oh yeah. It gives you such like a snapshot in time, and you hit the nail on the head.
Visual inspiration. Yeah. Because I love the more history I know, then I love combining history, memorabilia with my art.
Oh, absolutely. And let's move on to art. Since you mentioned art, now your website very elegantly shares that a quote from you, actually, and it says, "For me, painting captures the very essence of time and its passage." So I think that dovetails very nicely as far as what we were talking about. And I love this. And actually, I just wrote that down because I wanted to make sure everybody who is listening to this episode hears that. Could you share with me and with us when you realized that painting was a passion of yours and that it was something that you ultimately wanted to do with your life?
Alex, in a way, that's such an easy question, because I was only ever good at one thing. My primary intelligence is clearly visual spatial, and that I have actually taken that, figured it out early, and became an artist, because I don't think I'd be good at anything else. I'm one of those lucky people that I'm sure I'm doing what I was supposed to be doing. I mean, I'm using every day. I'm challenged every day. I feel like I'm using my talents to the fullest.
I love seeing the shots of you kind of crouched on the sidelines, doing paintings, just kind of on the fly. Like, how do you do that?
I, you know, I can paint live. I don't know if I could have done that 20 years ago, but I mean, I painted so many paintings, and I've just become very skilled at interpreting what I see visually, figuring out how to make that work for me. And I like the pressure. It doesn't freak me out to have, a crowd of people behind me or be on the field sketching. It just doesn't, I'm in my zone. It does not, I don't know how a quarterback feels because I was never a quarterback. I mean, I played a lot of tennis in my life, but I mean, when you're in the zone, you don't hear the noise. You're just focusing on the ball and the next play. And that's how I feel when I'm doing art.
Yeah, a lot of probably common attributes, because that was the first thing in my mind. We've all witnessed games at Notre Dame Stadium. We all know it can get awful loud in there. Or if you haven't witnessed a game at Notre Dame Stadium, you can imagine it gets awful loud in there, and you just seem like you're very calm, and it's a very serene thing. And I've watched the videos and I'm like, I don't know how she pulls that off, but it's awful impressive. So I can just sit back and marvel. So, and then when I look at your art too, and you mentioned history earlier, and that is something that's in my wheel. I studied history in college. And so when I look into your art, I see the history. And for me, it almost feels like preservation work from time to time, preserving those legends, those lores, those myths, whatever it might be. And you focus a lot of your energy on subjects such as the aforementioned Four Horsemen or Coach Rockne. Some of my favorites that you do are Notre Dame's first mascot, the Irish Terrier Clashmore Mike, but among many, many other subjects throughout Notre Dame football history. So why do you focus so heavily on these?
Well, okay, so it's part of my biography, right? My grandfather was there in 1924. And I am actively trying to get 1924 season. So let's just pretend in 2024, 100 years, I'm actively campaigning to get the Four Horsemen to ride out of the tunnel and around the field.
That would be amazing.
I'm actively have asked permission from the university to do sort of a Banksy type mural of the Four Horsemen on the brick inside the interior of the stadium.
Wow.
I mean, Clashmore, I love. He has a better winning percentage than our leprechaun.
That's true. That's right.
I don't know why our leprechaun can't have an Irish Terrier. That would be cool. But, if Freeman follows a little bit of history, you're a huge fan. Rockne won a national championship in his third year. Leahy won in his third year. Farsegian won in his third year. He should have won in 64 as well. That's, that one call in USC, the Phantom Hold. Right. Mine won in his third year. And, my painting of the 5 national championship coaches, having a bourbon. Yes. And I'm sure Lou's saying, yeah, and I won in my third year too, gentlemen.
Right. Well, yeah, I can certainly appreciate it. It's like, as you mentioned, it's this history, it's your family history to a certain degree. And that's why I think it just comes through and it really, really shines.
Yeah, but history is also because in 2024, that's Freeman's third year. That's what I just think history is part of today too. And I love combining memorabilia with art. I feel like it's more powerful if I can figure out how to do that. I just got, and I'm always, because I'm here, I'm always getting more precious relics because everyone knows I'm into it now. Like I just got some roof tiles from Corby Hall when it was demolished. That's where the Holy Cross priests and brothers live.
Right.
So, of course, I painted Father Corby blessing the troops at Gettysburg on that.
That's amazing.
I'm going to release those next week. I've gotten pieces of marble from the Hesburgh Library when they updated it. I love that site. And of course the Redwood Stadium seats. I love the date, the late 20s, the early 30s, we're talking about craftsman style. And I'm riffing off of that. We can talk about Rockne. We can talk about, hey, let's make frames out of these. Let's riff off what was happening design wise then. It's, to me, it's really interesting.
And just to kind of go off that, some of my favorite works you do are on those pieces of old stadium benches. And in case our listeners are otherwise unaware, I would first recommend you go check those out. But usually they're kind of tied in with whatever the seat number or numbers is. Sometimes you're lucky and you get the two numbers kind of put together. I mean, I think they're beautiful. I think they're ingenious. I hope to have one someday. But where did you get this? Where'd you get this idea to kind of start repurposing these relics and kind of making them art?
I was certainly aware that you could buy seats, and I saw a lot of them displayed, and I thought they were ugly. They were brown things with numbers, and I always kind of looked at them and I thought there's not enough there. And it just kind of sat in the back of my brain for a while. And then I finally thought, well, what we need to do is take the number of the seat and tie it into a year or a player or something. Or like, I've got a 32-33. I went to the Studebaker Museum yesterday in South Bend. I mean, I've done a couple seats where I've gotten those, and I've painted the Rockne sedan that was named for him posthumously in 32-33. So, I mean, yeah. So to me, with the Notre Dame lore, it can be almost anything.
Yeah. And the one that I just saw recently, I loved it with Coach Rockne, the drink the first, sip the second, and skip the third.
Do you do that, Alex, during games?
Admittedly, I'm not great at that. So
hey, it's 4 hours long. And if you're at tailgates, that's 6 hours. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
We can do, and how big are the drinks? I mean, it's a complicated question.
It is though. Yeah. There's a rolling scale as far as the size of there's a lot to consider there, but I just have to crack up because you could just hear him. Like, you read enough about Coach Rockne and you hear those words coming out of his mouth. It's perfect. So now, of course, not all of your creations are actually Notre Dame themed. And I think it's really important to, obviously this is a Notre Dame football podcast and we've talked a lot about those, but for instance, you do some amazing work of surfers, beaches, really just kind of that West Coast aesthetic, that West Coast imagery. So I happen to be a diehard Beach Boys fan, and that's something I actually wear quite proudly, something that most of my close family and loved ones know about me. But as an artist, what are your inspirations and motivations when considering your entire body of work?
Well, okay. You're a Beach Boy fan. I live in Manhattan Beach. They're from the South Bay.
Yeah.
I'm inspired by where I am, like the color, the history. When I moved to Malibu, I began painting Malibu. I paint Manhattan Beach all the time. I go for a walk on the beach. I've got my camera and sketchbook with me. I mean, sometimes you just see like the most beautiful color, the most beautiful wave. You see like, I'm on Manhattan Beach Pier and I look down and there's like this gorgeous wave with like 5 surfers in it. And it's just the most beautiful thing. That is as beautiful as a receiver catching a pass.
Right.
It's the same. And, so I'm inspired by real things, real beauty, like that quote you made about my work. I am inspired by where I am. It has to be real to me.
So as far as inspirations are concerned, thank you for sharing that, by the way. Kathleen, who are you inspired by? Do you have painters, artists that you just really draw a lot of inspiration from?
Oh, so I grew up in Chicago. So as a young person, I was at the Art Institute of Chicago many times, and I was completely blown away by the Monets and by the colors that he used. And I would say I'm still primarily a colorist. I think in color. I had the great, this summer, I went to Giverny for the first time, and I was able to sketch his house and his ponds and his bridges. And that was a really nice privilege for me. I would also say, growing up in Chicago, Leroy Neiman, another Art Institute guy, was a huge inspiration to me. I still think what he did with sports art in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, in a way, he kind of paved the way for what I'm doing right now. He created sports art as a collectible. And I don't really think that existed before. There were signed photographs, but I don't think anyone was really doing these seriographs and what he was doing. So that's my Chicago. When I moved to California, there was a lot of other influences on the West Coast for my work. But I'm going to just, to answer your question, because I think it relates most to your Notre Dame podcast, I would say Monet and Leroy Neiman.
I've got two, I guess, smaller questions, but I'm just curious because you seem to be like a bit of a purveyor of Notre Dame history. So you have to have a favorite Notre Dame football player of all time, or maybe 4 or 5.
I mean, that's a really hard question to answer because I've also been in the privileged position where I get to know a lot of them personally.
Right.
This weekend, Bob Crable is doing an event with me in Cincinnati. And I would say Bob Crable to me, he's okay. So how many tackles did he have in his Notre Dame career? It's like 541, something like that.
Ridiculous amount. Yes.
No one's ever gonna. And there was only 11 games, so no one's ever going to ever. And so, I mean, there's been so many players that have just been so good to me. Like Reggie Brooks is always there for me. Always helps me get Lou Holtz's signature. I'm really looking forward to doing this event with Bob in Cincinnati this weekend, Sunday at the Irish Heritage Center. Bob, even though I just talked about his tackle record, which will never be broken in the history of Notre Dame. I mean, you're probably a better stat person than I am, but I think Manti probably had 320 or something. Not even close. No one's close. My favorite game of his is the one I paint where he's blocking the Michigan field goal at the last second to beat Michigan.
Yes.
That was the 1979. Fantastic game. And he's a Moeller guy, which is a huge part of Notre Dame history. I mean, trivia question: what high school sent more kids to Notre Dame than any other high school in America? It's Moeller.
And a coach within Jerry Faust. Right.
Yeah.
Jerry Faust came straight up. And that's something you just don't see anymore either, is a guy coming from the high school ranks directly to a big job. That's what Jerry Faust did. He went from Moeller High School to Notre Dame. But yeah, Moeller High School. My father-in-law, as it were, coincidentally attended Moeller. He's a Moeller man. So
nice.
Not for nothing, I suppose. Shout out to my father-in-law.
Bishop Moeller. Yay.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I appreciate that. No, you're right. There's so many to pick from. And obviously, you've got kind of
cool... as far as like most enigmatic, you got to go George Gipp. I mean,
yes.
And I have also DNA there because my grandmother, who was at St. Mary's in 1928, she was from Calumet, Michigan.
Oh my goodness. You're kidding me.
No, she's buried about 20 yards away from Gipp. And so is my grandfather, went to Notre Dame. So I grew up going, so my great grandfather bought this decommissioned lighthouse in Eagle River, Michigan. Gips would show up at the beach and talk to us. Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm Jonah Gipp. And so my grandmother remembers, so Gipp was a little older than her. She went to Sacred Heart. He went to Calumet High School. She remembers watching him play baseball.
That is absolutely absurd.
Yeah. And so, I remember one year when we went to visit my grandparents' grave, my father said, okay, here's, we're going to find Gipp's grave. He's somewhere right around here. And and all 8 of us went around and
fanned out.
I found Gipp's grave. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. What a reminder
I've read so many biographies of him. It was just like, oh my God, could somebody have just put him to bed and taken out his tonsils? I don't understand, because, I'm a mom too, I'm like, he was so sick, just.
Yes.
I mean, he was so phenomenal, like his 8 yards per carry and his drop kick stuff. I mean, it's crazy what he was doing.
Kathleen, I don't know. It's hard for me not to get excited talking about Gipp, but first of all, I appreciate the friendly reminder that the world, as big as we think the world is, there's always a good friendly reminder that it's not as big as you think it is. What a cool intersection between your family and George Gipp.
Oh yeah, Gipp.
Unbelievable.
Yes. Because that has nothing to do really. Well, my grandfather, who went to Notre Dame in 28, he's from California, but it was my grandmother who lived in Calumet.
And then went to St. Mary's.
Yeah. So they met and married. But I mean, Gibbs, and Rockney will say he was the most phenomenal athlete he ever coached. Newt Rockney says that.
Oh yeah. As far as people in relation, because it's hard when you're talking about cross-generational things.
Really hard.
But however, when you're looking at if you have to just compare everybody kind of in a vacuum, compare them to their peers at the time, and in relation to his or her peers, whatever sport you're talking about, there probably was nobody better than George Gipp, nobody more dominant or explosive than George Gipp than in relation to his peers in the late teens and or 1920 season. He was phenomenal, as you say.
Well,
Unbelievable.
and, you just love these biographical stories of how, we lived at the Oliver Hotel, never attended classes, played, was this brilliant billiards player.
Yes.
He had just phenomenal hand-eye coordination. You just begin to hear these stories and you're just realizing this was just a phenomenal specimen. And Rockne, okay, so he's on the team, he's a player and kind of a coach by 1913.
Yes.
Okay, he's a senior and really kind of a coach. And then he dies in 31.
31,
30,
yes.
the last. So he's got a generation of people he's seen in his program, and he's seen nationally. He's looking at, from Army to USC. And he says George Gipp is by far and away the most astonishing athlete he ever came in contact with.
Yeah. He was actively playing games in that 1920 season while he was in all reality dying from his condition. But he loved the nightlife. He loved it. As you mentioned, he lived at the Oliver Hotel. I read an account where every time he walked through the front door, the pianist would like do a ragtime version of the Victory March, as he was a celebrity.
He was a major celebrity.
Yeah. And I remember reading that, when he passed, they turned all the lights out at the hotel to commemorate, that their most famous resident had passed away. So, okay, well, we definitely agree on that bit then, but appreciate you sharing the story about your family's connection with George Gipp. That's just so very, very interesting. So what's on the horizon here? Any short-term goals, anything you're working on, or anything that obviously you have the exhibition that you mentioned, and it's going to be all throughout the football season. So if you're up in South Bend in 2022 here during the 2022 season, make sure you head to where, Kathleen?
It's the hotel, the Embassy Suites on Angela.
Yes.
And it's the entire lobby. So right across the street from the football stadium. And I'm up in that lobby 24 hours a day.
Amazing.
So even though I can't be there 24 hours a day, I'm usually there for huge chunks of times on Thursday night, Friday night. I often do trivia contests on Saturday morning.
Oh,
especially if it's a night game, because we got a little bit of time. I give great prizes. Prizes, of course. And I love talking about Notre Dame trivia. And I like, you have to make it hard for Notre Dame fans too.
Oh yeah. You seem like you'd be a great facilitator of a trivia night, or I guess in some cases a trivia morning.
Although I have to say, once at a tailgate, I got really embarrassed because one of my trivia questions I was researching was how many Notre Dame football coaches also coached in the NFL?
Okay. Obviously. Okay. Dan Devine coached in the NFL. He coached the Packers. Did Elmer Layden?
Lou Holtz coached the Jets. That was
that's right.
A disaster.
I forgot about that one. Yeah.
So another one that you would never know is Hank Anderson.
Yeah.
Hartley Anderson.
George Gipp's best buddy.
George Gipp's buddy. Yep. He was right there. By the way, my grandparents have a dance card from 1927 for the junior promenade. And the two patrons were Newt Rockne and Hartley Anderson.
Oh my goodness.
Two national football coaches, two Notre Dame coaches.
That's amazing.
So I'm working through this list, and I'm talking to one of my friends, Mike Kaluark, at a tailgate. And he's like, well, there's my uncle. I'm so embarrassed, Kaluark, of course. And I had totally
right.
That's a problem with Notre Dame, it's not, the trivia is living. It's living trivia.
Right.
Well, it's my uncle, Kaluark. Yeah.
Oh, that's so true. Well, Kathleen, I got to tell you, I am very, very appreciative of this conversation, and thank you for sharing a little bit about your obvious gifts and your passions as well. I feel like we could probably talk for several hours about Notre Dame football, but thank you so much for sharing a bit of your time here today with Onward to Victory, a Notre Dame football podcast. Thanks for sharing the trivia, the tidbits, and just the company. We're very, very appreciative.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate your enthusiasm for my work. I appreciate you sending people to my shows at the Embassy Suites and
yes,
at Cincinnati on Sunday. I appreciate being part of the Golden family.
If you're in South Bend this fall, make sure you head to the Embassy Suites. So it's over on Eddy Street Commons then, or technically, is it
it's right next to Eddy Street on Angela.
Yes.
It's like right across the street from the football stadium.
Yes, you can't miss it. So make sure, again, fall 2022, if you're up for a home game, please go check out the work of Kathleen Keifer. It is there at the Embassy. I implore you to do it. And also, if you have some time, Saturday morning trivia, do it for me, please. Well, I'm going to break here and I'll be right back with show wrap. Welcome back, and I hope everybody enjoyed that delightful conversation I was able to have with artist Kathleen Keifer. Aside from just being a obviously creative person, her knowledge and perspective and passion for your Fighting Irish is obviously abundant. And so when you're talking to someone like that, makes it a really easy conversation. And so hopefully you really did enjoy that one. And please, by all means, go check out her art. It's at KathleenKeiferArt.com. Again, that's Kathleen, Kathleen, and Keifer, Keifer, and then art.com. That conversation and all conversations and episodes is, of course, brought to you by the Consensus All-Americans. One more time, we have Michael Finan of Rutherford, New Jersey, Brad Glazier of Williamsburg, Indiana, Will Fuller of Warren, Ohio, Dr. Jeremy Scarlett of Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, and Andy Nickel from South Bend, Indiana, and, of course, our banner sponsor, WCScreens.com. Without them, this episode and all the episodes do not happen. So thank you all once again for that. So please don't forget to subscribe to the show. Whether you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible through Amazon, don't forget to hit subscribe or follow or whatever it may be. That way you can be alerted to all the new and latest episodes. So if you're feeling nice, make sure you leave a rating, 5 stars preferably. And if you're feeling super nice, don't forget to leave a review as well. So with that, I am going to sign off. This has been the 69th episode of Onward to Victory, a Notre Dame football podcast talking with artist Kathleen Keifer. And in kindness, I am your host, Alex Painter. And as always, go Irish.